Hey fellow humans, today I want to talk about a subject which is one of the closest to my heart. It's life on Earth, it's the ecosystem, it's the biosphere. The talk is segmented into 5 parts. In part 1 we're going to talk about the state of the planet's health. Then we're going to touch upon the personal awakening moment I had roughly 10 months back, which triggered what's about to happen over the next many years. Then we're going to talk about the battle, the war between our current economic models and our desire to preserve nature. Then we'll talk about why we want to preserve nature in the first place. Then we'll touch upon the plan I have to fix this, to make our planet come alive with life again. Right, so let's start with the state of the planet's health. One of the things I've loved to do over the last many years, I wouldn't say loved, that's not the right description, but one of the things I've done over the last many years is collect notes and articles from many disparate sources, trying to get a sense of where we are as a species, and especially on the dimension of the planet's health, the health of our ecosystems. And I've done that as, among other reasons, as a means of inculcating that urgency, because only if you know what the state of the planet is are you going to be inclined to act towards doing whatever is necessary. Right, so this is going to make a grim reading, I warn you, but it is necessary to set the stage for the rest of the conversation. These are some articles from The Guardian and from some other sources. I'm just going to read the headlines to give you a sense of where we are, where the planet is at. Yeah, pretty good. You're sitting cozy, but this conversation is very much focused on the state of the planet's other inhabitants, right? Because we tend to think of us as being the alpha and the omega, but we share this planet with millions and millions of other species, and this conversation is more about those species than about humans, because we've been living in this very anthropocentric, very human-centric, especially since the age of enlightenment. And there are benefits to this, but just as a sense, again, we're going to talk about this, but I don't feel great about the fact that we come from these species that we share branches with a lot of the species which are alive today, and what we're doing to the homes of these species, what we're doing to these species is just unconscionable to me. Right, so collapsing wildlife populations near points of no return. Report warns as the average population falls reach 95% in certain regions, experts call for urgent action. Global wildlife populations have plunged by an average of 73% in the last 50 years, as humans pushed ecosystems to the brink of collapse. Latin America and the Caribbean recorded the steepest average declines in recorded wildlife populations, with a 95% fall, according to the World Wildlife Federation, and this was followed by Africa with 76% and Asia and the Pacific at 60%. Around 80% of countries failed to submit plans to preserve nature ahead of global summit, which was, I think, just a few days back, or maybe a couple of weeks back. Countries promised to save 30% of land and sea for nature, but as the deadline approaches, only 24 have followed through, which just tells you how pressing this is for different countries. Trees and land absorb almost no CO2 last year. Is nature's carbon sink falling? The sudden collapse of carbon sinks was not factored into climate models and could rapidly accelerate global heating. The world has yet to meet a single target set in the history of UN biodiversity agreements. Moving to the seascape, the state of our oceans. Microplastics have been found in dolphin breath for the first time, according to a study that suggests that marine mammals are inhaling the potentially harmful contaminants when they come up for air. Again, culling ferrets and rats are one of the UK's largest seabird colonies. Invasive species cost humans $423 billion each year and threaten the world's diversity. Corporations using ineffectual carbon offsets are slowing path to real zero. We don't know where the tipping point is. Climate experts on potential collapse of Atlantic circulation. The dangers of a collapse of the main Atlantic Ocean circulation, known as AMOC, have been greatly underestimated and would have devastating and irreversible impacts, according to an open letter released at the weekend by 44 experts from 15 countries. One of the signatories, Stefan Rahmstroff, an oceanographer and climatologist who heads the Earth System Analysis Department at the Potsdam Institute of blah 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 in Germany, explains that Hawaii's recently upgraded its risk assessment of an AMOC breakdown as a result of global heating and what that means for the wider world. And lastly, but most pertinently, would abandoning false hope help us tackle the environmental catastrophe? Leaders are eager to fill us with positivity, but research shows people in distress are more likely to take collective action. If despair is the most unforgivable sin, then hope is surely the most abused virtue. The observation feels particularly apposite as we enter the COP season, that time of the United Nations mega conferences at the end of every year, when national leaders feel obliged to convince us that the future will be better, despite growing evidence to the contrary. Climate instability and nature extinction are making the Earth an uglier, riskier, and more uncertain place. Desiccating water supplies, driving up the price of food, displacing humans and non-humans, battering cities and ecosystems with ever fiercer storms, floods, heat waves, droughts, and forest fires. Still worse could be in store as we approach or pass a series of dangerous tipping points for Amazon rainforest dieback, ocean circulation breakdown, ice cap collapse, and other unimaginably horrible but ever more possible catastrophes. Right, so that's the stage. If that doesn't ring alarm bells in your head, I don't know what would. Let me just gather my breath. So this is the macro state of the world. But why does it matter to me, right? A lot of life is about connecting the macro missions, the large scale things, to your own personal vision, to your own personal mission, to your own calling, to your own purpose about what you want to do whilst you're on this planet. And for me, I've always, ever since I can remember, I've always been fascinated with the natural world. I used to watch a ton of documentaries. I had a lot of pets, different pets like dogs, parrots. I used to love animals, still do, but I used to love animals when I was as young as I can remember. If I go all the way back to my first memories, or first conscious memories, I just had this temperamental, this love with nature, with wildlife. I used to love just being in the midst of nature, and that as a love affair was just persisted. It's one of the strongest love affairs I've got. And something happened the last year which put this on another level. So I was traveling in a few countries, and as I'm wont to do, I went out in the forest. And these are rainforests. These are supposed to be teeming with life. It's supposed to be bursting with life, with the sounds, the music of natural life, birds and animals. So yeah, this was some rainforest in Bali, Ubud, the mountains in Bali, Abang and Batur and other places in Bali. I was walking, and what was striking to me, what was conspicuous by its absence, was life, natural life, right? It's supposed to be places that's supposed to be teeming with life. I was in the sea, far away from the shore, quite a few times, and again, that's a different scenario. But whilst I was climbing these mountains was I was in the or even when I went to Malaysia and I was in those rainforests, I couldn't see many signs or any signs really of life. And that was striking to me because that was one of the things I was most looking forward to doing, just having spent a lot of time in the concrete jungles of London, where you're very far away from nature. I wanted to get back in touch with nature, and I couldn't do that. I mean, forests are not forests unless they've got life in them, right? So one big component of forests are obviously the trees, but what really makes for a forest is all the things that these trees support, right? All the life, all the flora, and that was missing. I could not, even in Mount Ubung, and I remember the climb. It was just me and the volcano. I just passed two teams on that day in those 12 hours I spent there. And I could see no signs of life. I could hear no birds. And I didn't think too much about this in the moment. And then I spent some time in the rainforest of this place, which is supposed to be one of the wettest places in India. And again, conspicuous by its absence was life, right? These are places where rainforests ought to be teeming with life, and yet they were anything but. That got me thinking about the state of affairs. That got me thinking about how much life is out there, right? Like in terms of density, not just in terms of, we hear about, for example, tigers, and we're like, oh great, we've got tigers in the world. China's got tigers, India's got tigers, Russia's got tigers. But if you look at the absolute numbers, if you look at the density, it's nothing. It is laughable, right? And that's the case with a lot of the species that are alive, the iconic species and the less than iconic species. And I came to the conclusion that ecosystems are, and then I did a lot of reading, did a lot of research, and I came to the conclusion that anyone would, if they spend a few hours reading about and understanding the state of our planetary health, which is our planet is dying, right? We are doing great, humans are doing absolutely great. If you look at the last 50 years, we are about to have flying cars, we are about to go to space, we are about to have space vacations, we are about to have our own personal robot butlers, perfect butlers, and we are about to eradicate diseases, we are about to live lives of hundreds of years. We're about to have all these technological revolutions, right? But the one thing which has been going in the negative direction, if you look at all the metrics which we care about, right? Education, poverty, wealth, all the different indicators that we care about, they're all going in the right direction, apart from tiny aberrations here and there. But generally, if you look at the macro trends, they're all going in the right directions, except for one thing: the state of the planet's health, species, forests, biosphere, ecosystems. And I quickly want to talk about this book. I think it was Origins by Dan Brown, right? My memories of this book are hazy. I read this probably like 10 years back. I think must have been 10 years back, yeah. But one of the points, and he actually shows this graph to people, that humans are killing the planet, and this planet is not just for us. This is what he says in the book. And I wouldn't say that this book was foundational to my thinking around nature. I always loved nature, but it kind of reinforced the idea around, I wouldn't say it did anything really, but it's just one of those themes that that you pick from fiction. And I just going to remember that he had this presentation and he created this cure, right? That a third of humans would be rendered infertile because a lot of these problems are correlated with overpopulation. More than overpopulation, I think they're correlated with not using the resources we have in a sustainable manner, right? We're going to get to all of that, but I don't think that this is, we can't just, I'm very pro-human. I want to see more humans. But our planet has a limited capacity, right? We cannot have 10 billion humans on this planet and not expect these 10 billion humans to have an outsized impact on the ecosystems, right? There's an ideal there's an optimal number according to scientists that's 2 to 3 billion. If you have 2 to 3 billion people living at the standards of the average American, then you're gonna have, I think it was less than the average American, that was the standard of the average European or something. It was significantly lower than the average American, right? Because a lot of the things about the American lifestyle are unsustainable because they don't have to be, right? Nature, the cost, a lot of these costs, a lot of these processes don't consider nature as an externality, right? It's just something that you deal with, that you just extract resources, but you don't consider the cost, right? Which is what got us to this mess, this point in the first place. Yeah, so what we're gonna do is that, whilst we are on this planet, whilst we are earthbound, we want to focus very much on sustainability because we are sharing this planet with a billion other species, probably not a billion. I mean, if you consider microbes and, maybe bacteria, because again, the rate of mutation of bacteria is insane. So you can imagine some of these species could create subspecies within hundreds of subspecies within days, within weeks, right? So I wouldn't want to talk about microscopic life, but if you look at macroscopic life, you're talking of millions of other species. A lot of these species, they can feel. They will not have the level of consciousness, and they don't likely have the level of consciousness that we do. They likely don't feel emotions the way we do. But a lot of these species do actually feel emotions, right? We share a lot of the apparatus with our mammalian cousins, be it primates or be it other mammals like cats and dogs and cows and whatnot, right? And we also got to realize that the planet is tiny. You tend to think of Earth as this infinite system where we can, keep on doing damage, keep on committing atrocities without any without any real impact on nature. But you only need to look at satellite images of the planet, which I've spent hours and hours doing. Like, that's one of my favorite pastimes, just looking at the planet, the satellite images of the planet, right? And then you realize that the human footprint on the planet is absolutely insane. If you think about how much of the land is devoted to agriculture, I think a third of the habitable land is devoted to agriculture. In some countries, it's more than half. You can see footprints of entire forests being wiped out. If you look at the satellite images of Amazon today compared to the Amazonian, compared to images 50 years back, you would see the forest has shrunk by more than half. You can find similar things with a lot of different places, right? You've destroyed habitats, you've wiped out millions of species. Our forests have become empty, devoid of life. And these were hitherto bountiful, they were hitherto thriving. This is all our doing. And so that was my personal motivation. I deeply care about making this planet work and making this planet thrive for not just us, which is what I'm going to do through my work in AI and other places, but also making the planet work for other species, right, that we share this planet with. We might be the only life, this planet might be the only place with life in the entire universe. We owe it. And because we are intelligent, because the intelligence, that awareness gives us that moral responsibility. This is where the friction comes, this is where the eternal battle comes in, right? If you look at England, for example, England cleared out almost all its forests over hundreds of years in the Middle Ages to fuel its expansion across the globe, right? England, or rather Britain, was the preeminent global power for 100 years, 150 years, and apart from all the looting and all the colonialism, one of the things that was behind that growth engine was England using its fuels and using its forests and all its natural resources without wanting to preserve it, right? Now you extrapolate that onto the entire planet and you get to the point where we are currently, where we all want better quality of life, right? We all want to, and that better quality of life, we all want more, right? And what that entails is extracting more out of nature. But if every single person on the planet wants the lifestyle of the average American, then there would be no there would be no forest left. There would be no life left except for factory farming. And that is so dystopian. That is truly one of the most dystopian visions I can imagine, right? Where we convert the entire planet into a factory for our own gratification, not considering the plight of creatures that cannot speak for themselves. That would be tragic. And that's what's been happening. That's the trajectory. That's the trend line that we've been on. There are three big bottlenecks to economic growth. One is labor, and that's physical labor plus intelligence. And the second is energy, and the third is raw materials, right? We're about to, with nuclear fusion and with space-based solar power, we're about to embark on an era of functionally infinite energy. We're also about to embark on an energy of functionally infinite labor with AGI and with robots that will be able to do work better than humans would. Two of the greatest bottlenecks, and then raw materials, right? There's a lot of raw materials in the planet that if you don't have constraints of energy and labor, you can extract these raw materials. So that's almost like a follow-up factor or lag factor to these two fundamental factors which determine the size of the economy. And so what I fear, this is a very real fear, is that once we got AGI, once we got these humanoids that can do better work than most humans can, and once we got functionally infinite energy, we might turn the entire planet into a factory to, keep on churning out tablets and PCs and whatever floats people's boats, right? Whatever people consume in this consumerist, affluenza afflicted world that we live in, materialistic world that we live in. And that is something which is very likely to happen if we don't course correct. One of the reasons behind this was that we never considered nature to be a cause, right? If you, for example, want to get resources from a forest, you don't have to pay anything to the forest or to any other agency, right? You just get what you want, and that is obviously the tragedy of the commons, right? And because a lot of these natural ecosystems have been in the commons, they have been decimated, a lot of them beyond the point of no return. That has been the tragedy of the commons laid out and playing out across the global scale. Before we move on to my plan and my vision, I want to briefly talk a bit more about my own personal motivations, the Horizon Tetra for the master plan and for the vehicle I want to build to serve this mission of building a better world, not just for us but for our animal species, for all the animal and plant species that we share this planet with, right? All the life that we share this planet with. I love life. I love the idea of life, and I love life of all stripes and all shapes and all sizes, right? Life is good in an empty, desolate, bleak universe. Life is objectively the most good there is, right? It's the most beautiful thing. Not just human life, but life of all sorts. And what I've concluded over the last many years is that humans are going to be alright. The techno-optimists, the techno-accelerationists, effective accelerationists, the transhumanist movements, they have, and these are movements I agree with to a large, almost entirely. These are movements that I would be a part of in different ways, right? Because of these movements and because of the mimetic impact that they are about to have on our planet's trajectory, and because of the model I have, and because of all the news coming out around imminent AGI, around the solving fusion, around new reusable rockets leading to very low cost of setting up space-based solar power, right? We are going to solve, like, everyone's going to have their own personal teacher, tutor, Education is just going to be revolutionized in the best ways possible. Healthcare, again, everyone's going to have their own personal doctor, and that doctor is going to be better than any doctor anyone's ever had, because that doctor is going to know every single disease. That doctor is going to be able to build, AGI systems are going to be able to build these medic bays. There's this device in the movie Elysium where there's this bay which can fix any problem, any medical issue that you might have. That's going to go from the realm of science fiction to reality in the next 10-20 years. You're going to live longer lives. It's going to be veritable utopia for the greatest many, right? But the one thing which is not going to fare so well in that world is the thing that cannot speak for itself, is the thing that cannot fight for itself. And that is the thing that I want to fight for. Nature, biosphere. And also, there's this counterfactual impact that one can have, right? It's not so much about, me having any impact. I don't attach my ego to it. But when you think about what you want to do with your limited time over here, you probably want to choose something in which you can make a greater impact. And if you didn't do that, then that thing wouldn't have happened, right? In the counterfactual, where you didn't pursue that path, then the outcome didn't eventuate. So an example of this could be, there are not too many great examples, but I'll give you one anyways. I'll give you the example of a company, right? A company like Facebook or a company like Google. These are not evil companies by any stretch of the imagination, but let's just take Facebook, right? They allowed a lot of social media harm to propagate through the platforms, and they didn't take it seriously. Now imagine someone who deeply cared about humanity, deeply loved humanity, who was at the helm of who built something like Facebook. Instead of Mark Zuckerberg going through his journey, it was someone else who genuinely deeply cared about people, right? Who had great relationships with people and who genuinely deeply cared about people. Now, the negative impacts of social media would have been minimized substantially, radically, right? So that's the impact of counterfactuals. And so in this case, even if I don't participate in AGI, even if I don't participate in the next large-scale projects I want to do in nanotech, things are going to be alright. Humans are going to be alright. Even with the full brunt of climate change, humans are going to be alright. I mean, at this point, I'm a big believer in technology. At this point, humans, it's almost, I wouldn't say it's inevitable, because, you don't want to get complacent. You do want to have a really good bearing of the risks. Like, superintelligence risks are enormous, right? Or risk of becoming us being rendered extinct because of underlying superintelligence, I would place them in the high 20s. Our risks of, wiping ourselves out because of stupid nuclear wars, I would place those risks at 2 to 5%. And these are substantial amount of risks, right? So I don't want to minimize. 2 to 5% might not sound like a lot, but when you're talking of the fate of the entire species, or the trajectory of our species, right? When you look at the counterfactual of all the goodness and consciousness that could have happened had the nuclear wars not happened, then you start to realize that as great as our future can be, we gotta have a really good bearing of minimizing those risks that can derail our progress, right? So all of that's going to happen. I'm going to continue to contribute to that. I'm going to hopefully contribute to that in significant capacities that I've just never been able to. But something which is very close to my heart, which I don't see too many people talk about, where I can have a greater counterfactual impact, is saving nature, right? Saving wildlife. The positive impact that one can have over here would be categorically different, because if that vehicle didn't happen, then these species wouldn't have been saved. So that is one of the big drivers. Another thing is that we haven't been able to communicate with animals. But what we don't consider to any serious degree is that what if animals have a far more sophisticated model of emotions than we give them credit for, right? What if they can actually understand? What if, us capturing these whales and um, and rearing cows and buffaloes and whatnot for our own pleasure, what if it gives them pain, right? Is that the kind of species we want to be? Right, that was everything that we had to do in the past. Like, we were butchers, we were savages, we used to kill each other, forget about animals. But the savagery, if you look at human history, you are going to be in for a rude awakening. Like, we were absolute. I was watching a video a few days back, about the torture devices used in the past, right? I was watching a video just today around the most destructive weapons that we have. These weapons, there's a Satan weapon that Russia's got, there's the Tsar Bomba equivalent that Russia's got. These can flatten entire cities, kill millions of people in 1 second, right? Humans are evil for even creating these things. Like, I don't know if humans are evil, I take that back. But there's this streak in humans which is destructive, right? Which doesn't mind causing harm, doesn't mind causing suffering. And that's, again, if you just look at evolutionary history, it had to be that way. I wouldn't say it had to be that way, but animals they're not savages, they're not evil in the sense that evil is evil, because the reason we assign this label of evil to humans is, if you know that you're causing suffering and you still cause that suffering, then you're evil, right? But an animal that kills other animals to survive, that's not evil. That's just, it's like a robot, right? It's an automaton. But for humans who are aware of the damages and who are aware of the feelings and the emotions, right, of pain, like, if one were to kill, well, I don't want to use my example, that'd be stupid, but if one were to kill Gaza, right, you're literally allowing children, so some of us are killing children, innocent children. Oh, gosh, I don't want to talk about that right now, but there are people alive right now who are killing children, and there are people allowing that, right? That is, the point is, I want to wrap this up real quick. The point is that humans are capable of causing great suffering, of being really fucked up when it comes to causing harm, right? And the harm that we cause to these species when we do factory farming, and when we do this fishing, and when we do this, keeping animals in the zoos, and when we destroy habitats, what if in the future we realize that these animals were able to feel the pain that, well, some extent of the pain that humans have felt? When we want to minimize human suffering, right? If you look at human rights, if you look at countries like there's this concept of suicidal empathy, right? Where I don't want to talk about suicidal empathy per se, but there's this notion that people who are willing, I actually went on a completely, oh yeah, the reason that concept cropped up in my mind was that there are people living in the United States, the United Kingdom, who want to allow people to break the law to come into their countries because it's the right thing. And I completely understand that. Empathy is a great thing, right? But we reserve that for humans. We don't think about, most of us really don't really extend that. Our circles of compassion are very limited. Our circles of empathy are very limited, right? And there are good reasons for that. But the point is that, what if in the future we realize that, again, Americans, for example, they are taught that slavery is bad. A lot of Americans feel guilt and feel remorse about that, even though they didn't partake in that, right? What if we feel the same about our treatment of factory farming, about our treatment of animals, about destroying these habitats 100 years in the future, once we become the more refined species, which we hopefully will become, right? So that's some of the things which are behind my own personal motivation. I could talk about and this is going to be a long series, because it's something I think about a lot. It's something in which I plan to build a vehicle, an organization that is going to transform the planet into a teeming, green utopia that is going to solve problems around pollution, solve problems around environmental decimation, solve problems around biosphere degradation, right? So it's going to be, I'm going to talk about the individual problems and solutions and projects that I have in mind. I've got this document, tons and hundreds of pages where I'll outline plans, and I've done a lot of brainstorming. And as these things take shape, as I start gathering more resources, I will talk more and more about it. But for now, this is something that I'll be spending a huge chunk of the next 50 years, the remaining 50 years of my life on. So I'll just use this conversation as the starting conversation. This vision that I have for this world, this master plan that I have, is one of the most important things to me. One of the most important things to me. It's almost like, not almost, it's like my personal mission. And I feel like it's my moral responsibility, my moral duty to protect those that we are so deeply connected to in ways that we don't yet understand, we don't yet appreciate. We came from them, and they cannot fight for their survival, and so we must. We've always done that. We fought for the people, for the entities that couldn't fight for themselves, and this time it's for... It's so difficult to talk about this, because on the one hand, you want to be optimistic, you obviously have your own convictions, and those are great, but at the same time, you're very aware that the clock is ticking. It's ticking fast. There are species which are becoming extinct by the day. Every day we are losing hundreds and maybe thousands of species. We are destroying entire habitats. It's painful to consider it's just like it's painful to, I'm not equalizing the two by any stretch of the imagination, but just like it's so painful to read about what's happening in Gaza, what's happening in Ukraine, it's painful to hear about and read about what's happening in the Amazon, what's happening in the Papua New Guinean jungles, what's happening in the Malaysian jungles and the Indonesian jungles and the different places. Yeah, it's difficult. But we must not buckle under this, right? We must use this as a fuel. Some of the things I wanted to, I don't want to, get into the details because that makes this very long, and that's probably for another conversation. But I want to create this environmental platform that's going to facilitate all of these different things. It's going to be an organization that I hope the scope of it is, I hope, is going to engulf the entirety of the planet. It's going to seed and incubate these different projects that are going to lead to more thriving ecosystems, more abundant ecosystems, solving pollution problems, removing all the plastics from oceans, and removing carbon from the ecosystems, and removing trash from places, and beautifying places, right? Greenifying spaces. Because remember, we evolved, we lived in nature. To move away from nature is not in our nature. So if you can greenify spaces, cities, and entire landscapes, then you add more beauty to the world. And you add more beauty, you add more well-being to the world. And that's one of the more philosophical drivers behind this mission. I want to create the world's biggest sanctuary, which has all these different ecosystems and all the species. And then there's going to be a Noah's Ark kind of a thing, where there are all these species. In the case of the worst case scenario, where some local ecosystems get wiped out, you can seed them because there's this Noah's Ark equivalent. So I want to build that. I also want us to move beyond the framing of conservation and preservation, because we've destroyed so much that if you just talk about conserving, it's just not enough. We need to talk about seeding more life. We need to talk about greening, terraforming entire arid regions into thriving forests, right? For example, the Sahara. Imagine if you can have two Amazons in the Sahara itself. You can have an Amazon in the United States, half an Amazon in the United States. You can have so much life if only I wouldn't say if we get our act together, if you just have a group of committed people Yeah, one of my favorite quotes is from Margaret Mead, who is an American anthropologist, and she did some great work, but she said this, which has stuck with me ever since I came across this, which is that never doubt that a small group of thoughtful, committed citizens can change the world. Indeed, is the only thing that ever has. Right? There's so much truth in it. You just need to get a bunch of really committed people together, really thoughtful people together, who understand what's at stake, who understand the implications, who have the appreciation for nature, for the biosphere. And that's it. That's all we need. That is all we need. This also would require a significant departure from the way humans have treated nature in the past as something which is almost a place where you just extract stuff from. There are people who want to preserve nature for their own selfish reasons, right? You get more resources out of it, it gives you more joy. Again, this goes into the debate of you can have a completely altruistic reason. I want to preserve nature because it's not ours to preserve. It was there before us. Right. It's a moral duty because we destroyed it. You've been destroying it. But to say that, you don't want to think of us as gods of the universe. Maybe one day we will be, but being a god of the universe requires you to have wisdom, right? Our species does not have that. Because if we were wise, we wouldn't treat our fellow humans, we wouldn't treat nature, our fellow life forms the way we have. What we've done with wiping out entire ecosystems without a second thought, whales in the seas in the 18th centuries, bisons and other megafauna in the Americas, the Amazonian decimation, the orangutans culling in Southeast Asia. I can give millions of examples. We can talk about this for hours. This reminds me of the sentiment of this reminds me of this quote from Leo Tolstoy, who said that as long as there are slaughterhouses, there will always be battlefields. The sentiment holds very true, right? As long as we keep on, you can replace the word slaughterhouses with, destroying nature, that will be true. We need to extend, human dignity to, I wouldn't say use the same term, but an equivalent term for nature, right? It has its own rights. We need to respect those. Another reason. Also want to briefly mention the wildlife and biodiversity, the net zero framing, right? People talk of conserving nature because that's good for net zero, right? That gets us to the more trees we plant, the better it is because it minimizes the climate catastrophes. But I want to move beyond that paradigm again because that's us being selfish, right? I want us to move beyond that paradigm. I want us to move to the paradigm of we want to see more life flourish, we want to see more of wildlife flourishing, right? We want to have a stable climate because that's better not just for us but for animals, not just because it enables us to continue our trajectory of economic growth, but because it's good for the other life forms we share this planet with, right? This is going to require a paradigm shift in our perception and our relationship with nature. Because this will require us to ascribe a moral good to nature, to wildlife, which we haven't ascribed. Just as we ascribe a moral worth to our fellow people, right? The Bill of Rights, the Magna Carta, even the Hamu thingy, right? A lot of the progress has come in the realm of our treatment of our fellow citizens, despite us having these murderous tendencies, our ancestors rather, hopefully not me and you. So our ancestors, killing people, like if you go back 10,000 years, 20,000 years, well, when we were hunter-gatherers, right? Like almost every male would have killed another person, probably. Like every able-bodied male probably would have killed another person in a war, in self-defense, whatever, right? That is astonishing when you think about it. That is, yeah, I mean, it's difficult to process that. Taking another human life, right? No, it's difficult to process because we live in a completely different context, but we still have the same brain. But this shows you the kind of paradigm shifts that can happen, the revolutions that can happen, the transformations that can happen, the transcendence that can happen in our own situation, right? Think about the Buddha, for example. Buddha was of the same species that I am. And I'm not evil or anything, but maybe I'm not the best example because I'm pretty run of the mill. Uh, yeah, Buddha was of the same species that Hitler was, right? Like, think about that. They were on the same. They were in the same species, right? Which is to say that humans have got a great potential to alter their perception, alter their relationships with different objects, right? If you think about slavery, for example, many people were considered subhuman just a few hundred years back, and now everyone's got equal rights. There's even the slightest discrimination is frowned upon. It's a cancelable offense. It just shows the progress that we've made as a species. Think about, yeah, so that's a kind of paradigm shift that we need to have with our relationship with nature and wildlife. We'll need people who have a deep bond, a deep appreciation, and we'll need those people to act as a bridge between the status quo and that utopian harmony between us and nature. Before I wrap this up, before I have my last remarks, I want to give a glimpse of the first project because I'll start with limited capital, right? I'm really hoping to get to that capital as soon as possible, but I'm not going to be able to start with, hundreds of millions or tens of millions of dollars, right? So it's going to be a staggered plan, right? Phase one is going to be more limited in its scope, in its aspirations. Then hopefully they'll allow me by the time phase one is over, I'll have gathered more resources through other projects that I'm doing. That'll allow me to put those resources into this channel, and that'll allow me and the team to be more ambitious with phase two of the operations, and allow us to, expand our reach and expand the magnitude of what we can achieve with that vehicle. So phase one is going to be started with, I've got this figure of 500k in USD, and that's going to allow me to buy or develop in-house a ton of drones and a ton of robots which have been optimized for terraforming entire landscapes, right? And also digging robots. So in phase one, what I'm going to do is pick a few places in the world. There are a few hotspots which are very promising. The US Western region is one. India is another one. Some regions of China, the Middle East, Sahara, right? Which are very devoid of life, very arid regions. That if you just added water to these regions, right, over a span of a few decades, or a few years, these ecosystems would start thriving. So what I want to do in phase one is, set up a system of get these digging robots to work to build these underground pipelines, lay out these underground pipelines, and dig deep reservoirs that would allow a year-long supply of water to be maintained in these places. And that would allow these ecosystems to flourish. That would allow, and you would want to set up reservoirs at a distance of, let's say, a few hundred kilometers from each other, which would be connected with series of canals and pipelines, underground pipelines, and that would allow entire regions to be transformed. It would terraform that region into green, fertile, beautiful, and maintain that greenery across the entire year, right? Because monsoons, the rainy season has enough water. The problem is not being able to hold that, right? Because almost all of that just gets spilled off into the sea. That's one part of it. And then in phase two, I'm going to set up desalination plants, because the issue isn't that we don't have enough water. The issue is we don't have enough energy, right? Well, we don't have enough we have enough energy in one sense, in the sense that we get enough energy from the sun, but we don't have enough energy capturing devices, right? So solar energy, whatever you want to use. So that's going to be part of phase 2. But just with phase 1, I want to convert, let's say, a few hundred square kilometers of arid regions into these green utopian regions, and then I want to incubate these regions with life, with plants, and I mean plants goes without saying, but more diversity of plants, and that would lead to better soil quality and more and seed these places with animals and birds and insects, and yeah, that would almost start chain reactions across these places. That's a plan. The goals would be to obviously convert these into green fertile landscapes that would just add more beauty, that would make these land areas more productive, because you can now convert these into kinds of farms that would allow us to not cut down new forests to convert them into farms, because a ton of the Amazonian deforestation, a ton of the Indonesian forest deforestation is because these regions need to be are converted into farms, right? So if you can convert arid regions into farms, or low yield regions into farms, then you do away with the need of so that's going to be, again, there are a lot of complexities, a lot of factors that we'll talk about later, but that's going to be phase 1. And so, time for my closing statements. I believe in doing things at a large scale. Believe not just in planting a few trees here and there, being happy with it and calling it a day, but doing things at a planetary scale, terraforming our planet and then beyond. And I intend to make sure that happens. Plan is that as soon as I've gathered enough resources to kickstart the plan, I'll push this vision into action, and I deeply hope, more than that, I intend to ensure that the world in 2080 is a world of thriving ecosystems with abundant life, and our entire planet covered in trees and teeming with life, and we'll be healthy and happy for us. That is the vision of 2080, and I am going to leave no stone unturned to make that happen. Yep, I think that's pretty much it. Thanks for the time. I'll catch you soon. Bye bye.